Elder is a source of food and medicine, and it is a beautiful, easy to grow, hardy shrub for your home garden or farm. In this video, Conrad Richter talks about the different varieties of elder and how to grow them. Welcome to Richter's Seminars. This video presentation is from a series of free educational seminars on herb and garden topics offered each year at Richter's. I'm Conrad Richter, president of Richter's Herbs, and I'm very pleased to welcome you all to the National Herb Day celebration at Richter's this year. We're celebrating the herb of the year this year is elder, and we have lectures today on growing and using elder. Just a little programming note to begin with. The scheduled speaker for the second part of today's presentation unfortunately had a personal family crisis, very short notice, and is unable to be with us today. However, we have, I think, more than adequate replacement speakers who will fill in, speaking on both the food uses and on the medicinal uses of elder in the second half of today's presentation. So in this first half, I'm going to speak on elder, how to grow it, what's special about it. We've got to start with the species. The elder comes in a number of different species. And what you see here, can you in the back see that? Yes? Okay, good. So the generic name is Sambucus. And then each species has, a second part of the Latin name. The most common elder that is used throughout the world is Sambucus nigra. What is that? That's the black elderberry, and also known as European elder. It is very, very close to the North American or American elders. In fact, recently botanists have decided to assign the North American versions of elder as a subspecies of the European form. They're so close, they're very difficult to tell apart. And as we get into the seminar, you see the pictures, and in a very superficial way, it's almost impossible to tell them apart. There's a more distinctive elder that grows on the west portion of North America, mostly in the western United States, called blue elder. And it too has been moved in to the same species as the black elder, the common black and European elder. There are a couple of other species that you might encounter here. In this area you will find red elder with red berries. Those are not edible. Those berries are not edible. It's the black elderberry with the dark, almost black, purple, blue berries that are used in medicine and used as a food. And finally, there's another variety that you see less often than the others called dwarf elder. Sometimes you'll see it in nurseries and in gardens, but it's not that common. Beyond these are more species. But what I want to concentrate on and mostly are the first two, the European black elder and its subspecies, the American elder, North American elder. So this is an example of black elder, the European elder. And if you're familiar with elder, if you've seen it in the countryside, you'll have seen bushes like this. This is a little bit on the larger side, more like a tree. It can get up to 6 meters high, so a good 20 or more feet tall. And it can form quite thick trunks. So although we usually think of elderberry as a shrub, it is also a tree under the right circumstances. And that's the typical elderberry foliage and flower. These are a smallish flower bunch that's starting. It's what we say in botany, these are what's called compound leaves. So many leaflets combine together to form a larger leaf. And here's the flowers more fully open, and the detail. The flowers are very important medicinal herbs. Of course, some of you may have had the great fortune to have tried elderflower fritters that are fried. I don't know if has anyone tried that before? No? Okay, one in the back. Two. Okay, so you may, if you ever get a chance to try it out, they're really quite special. So the elder flowers are very important, but they're also very important medicinally. And of course the elderberry wine, elderberry jams, jellies, juice, and cordial, and many other products. More recently, the nutraceutical industry has taken a great interest in elderberry for its health benefits, and has turned it into all sorts of nutraceutical type products, supplements in the form of tablets, capsules, and tinctures and supplements, other supplements. Well, as I mentioned, black elderberry, the European one, is very common, and if you include the American one as part of the black elderberry, say, group, this map here shows you where it has been found growing. As you can see, pretty much anywhere in the temperate areas of the world, both in the southern and northern hemisphere. Of course, it's most common in, it is a northern hemisphere plant, but it does quite well in places like South America, even Africa, and in Australia. You can occasionally find it even in the tropics and subtropical area, but those are probably generally in elevated areas. Elderberry is an amazing plant from a horticultural point of view. It can survive zones as low as zone 3 all the way up to zone 11, which is subtropical. So you find elderberry populations from as far north as northern Quebec all the way down to Mexico and beyond. Those are the natural populations. So it's an incredibly adaptive plant, able to withstand a wide variety of conditions. And as a consequence, it happens to be one of the easier berry plants that you'll grow. In North America, you find that it is in all the eastern provinces of Canada. It's found most of the United States, and you'll find even a few populations in places like California. In the very far west states like Oregon and Washington, you'll find one of the other subspecies, that blue elder that I mentioned. You'll find that in that area. So really, when you think of the Sambucus nigra, it's throughout North America. So this is now the North American version. You'll find this in Canada and all through the United States. And superficially, it's almost identical to the black one. And for the most part, is used in pretty much the same way. The leaves are very similar. Flowers are very similar. And the fruit's pretty similar. Now this, the fact that the fruit is so dark, so black, is really crucial for understanding the medicinal properties of this plant. The color and substances are due to a number of classes of compounds, including flavonoids, anthocyanins are a subgroup of that, and these increasingly we're finding out have incredible bioactivity in the body. They stimulate, for example, the immune system. They counteract virus attacks. It's an incredibly important group of compounds. Some people who study the brain and especially using brain imagery techniques, found that dark fruits, dark small fruits like blueberries are like super brain foods. You can see from a patient who has had a severe stress on the brain, with even holes in the brain showing up in these images, will suddenly improve, not suddenly, but over time improve with the ingestion of dark, soft fruits like blueberry. And elderberry is in the same class. So here's the same North American elder, but as a smaller shrub form. This is more like what you would have in your garden. It gets up to about 5, 6, as much as 8 feet high. If you let it, it will grow up to 20 feet under the right conditions, but generally you will be pruning it back to keep it in a more constrained and more tidy shape. I mentioned some of the other species. There was 5 species I had in my early list. Question here?
Is there a necessary to put more than one elder in one spot to ensure that you get fruit?
Yes, there is. It's not absolutely necessary, but because elderberries are not completely self-incompatible, meaning that they do have the ability to set some fruit when there are no other varieties present, but you get a much better fruit set if you have at least another variety within about 20 meters. Okay?
I have one more question.
Sure.
What's the difference for a Japanese variety of elder? Does it matter if I put, say, the Bob Gordons that were sold out here in, say, within 10 feet of the black lace Japanese elder? Would it affect the fruit?
So the question is, can you put a variety called Bob Gordon with black lace, ornamental type? Yes, you can put them. You can use the black lace as a pollen donor for the Bob Gordon for a fruit set. Okay?
It won't produce fruit, though.
Sorry, which one? The black lace? Yeah, black lace produces fruit. I have a picture of one. Huh? Coming up. But anyway, I'm speaking on the screen. What you see here is I'll come to you in a second. Okay, on the screen you see the red elder. So this is the one to avoid. Do not consume the berries as you would the black elder. It's not that this isn't used and is medicinal. It is, but for the purpose that most people, I think, here are growing it for food and for other uses, you want to avoid this one. Sorry, there's a question here?
You didn't mention the golden elder. We had a golden elder that was planted probably 35 years ago, all by itself. And this produced flowers and fruit year after year. A couple of years ago, I planted 2 other elders in different locations, side by side. One of them, I think, was a black elder. The other one, I don't know. They never bore any flowers or fruit that I could see. And then a year or so ago, I thought I probably split them too hard and it died. But the golden elder is still there. How do you explain that?
And it's fruiting.
Yeah.
And it's fruiting.
Flowers and fruit every year.
Yeah. Okay, so did everyone hear the question? Yes? No? Well, no? Question? Okay, so the question was that the gentleman has had a golden elder for many years, 30 or so years, and then recently planted a black elder and I think one other variety. And the golden elder by itself for many years produced fruit, but the black elder suddenly perished and was pruned back and perished. And the gentleman wants to know whether I had any comments or explanation for what happened. As I mentioned, elder is partially self-compatible. It will produce fruit under the right circumstances. So it's not an obligate outcrosser. What we say must cross to it with another variety or species. So it's not surprising that you did get fruit with the golden one. On the case of the black elder, the one that was planted, lots of possible reasons why you might have lost that.
The elder.
What time of year did you plant the elder?
Well, I don't
And then you pruned it back. So it grew and then pruned it back.
The black elder and white elder side by side in a different kind of backyard. Both elders in the front. This is quite separate. But those two never bore fruit or flowers like you wanted. And then when I pruned it back as it was getting too big, I pruned it probably like March. And in the fall I did. And it died.
Yeah, if you and you pruned it in the spring, most likely.
I think I pruned it in the fall.
In the fall, okay. I don't have a magic answer for you to explain that. I might, that's the kind of situation where I'd like to actually see what happened there. Possibly you cut back, yes, too much, and cut back too many of the next year's buds and growth. But I honestly, I can't give you a direct answer.
My major question was why didn't it have these flowers and fruit where it's no all by itself?
Well, that can happen if elderberry, if fertilized, for example. It's oftentimes when you do a new planting, you put a lot of extra fertilizer or manure or compost or something like that. Excessive fertilizer will suppress flowering, for one. The second thing is that elder takes 3 or 4 years to reach a prime fruiting stage where it produces the maximum amount of flowers and so on. You'll see a chart coming up later where I show that in the 4th year commercial farms reach their maximum production. So possibly the plant was in that early establishment stage, didn't get there, and then for some reason, possibly through over pruning, it perished before it could produce a yield. Question?
Yes, I wonder if you could just comment on which animals, birds, insects are attracted to the plant.
Well, all I can say is that it's mostly birds. Birds are the biggest challenge, and in fact, raccoons, not that I know of. Has anybody got, I'm going to invite input from the audience if anyone is growing elder now and has an experience with animals. I can't answer that. I did not see any reference. One thing about elder is this, that the foliage and the stems in particular have compounds in there that animals dislike. They find it actually poisonous. And in fact, the mythology, if you go back to the Middle Ages, described the plant as being protected by the deity, by God, because animals would generally not bother an elder bush. So from that perspective, perhaps that's a good start in protecting the plant, because unless they can reach up there and get there, they're going to stay away from the plant anyway. It's already got elements of toxicity around the plant.
Applies to birds as well?
Well, no. Birds, on the other hand, are very much love elderberry, and some species, particularly the black one, have developed partial strategies to prevent birds from going after them by setting the fruit flowering groups down and making it harder for the birds to land and feed off the flowers. Other species of elderberry stay upright. And in fact, one of the breeding goals of some of the new black elderberries that I'll talk about in a few moments is to find ones that even droop further down as a way to ward off birds. So definitely the birds can bother them.
One other question. The leaves. What's medicinal qualities and how would you use the leaves?
I'll show you that in a bit, okay? All right?
You're talking about toxicity. If you have if you dry the berries, save them over the winter, and is there any problem with the seeds being toxic if you use them for baking, such as in cookies or?
Elderberry seeds, you can express an oil, a medicinal oil from it.
Using the dried ones whole in baking or something, is there any problem with that?
Generally not, no. Okay. So this is the flower of the red elder. The red elder flower is quite different. The black elder and the North American elder is a little bit more of a flat, what they call a cyme, where all the florets, all the flowers are arranged in a kind of umbel with this configuration, whereas the red elder is a little bit more of a ball shape, and you see that in the fruiting as well. See the way the fruits are arranged on the plant. This is the blue elder I mentioned earlier, the one that grows on the west coast. It looks just like a blueberry. So it has this kind of, just like the blueberry, it has this kind of white powdery material on the outside to give it this kind of ghosty cast look. And this is that dwarf elder that I mentioned earlier that you may occasionally encounter. It too produces berries, and this one is found to be very medicinally active. The research is, there's a lot of research on this particular species. The one thing that's attractive about this plant is that it is, as the name suggests, more dwarf and better, behaves better in tighter gardens and tighter situations. And there's the fruit, as I mentioned, the fruit being used in a number of scientific studies. Now, elderberry has, for the longest time, been also grown as an ornamental. And in recent years, a number of ornamental varieties of elderberry have been introduced to the market. The commercial line called Proving Winners has put out a couple of varieties, and I'm sure you've seen them. If you've gone to other nurseries, you will have encountered those types of varieties. So I'll just run down a few of them just so that you'll be familiar. We do not grow the ornamental ones here. Although most of them can be used for medicinal purposes and also for food, they generally don't produce as many berries, or the berries are smaller. The productivity is less. The varieties that we're focused on are the varieties that are specifically bred for large berries, for better berry qualities like more sweetness, and for earlier and heavier yields. So here's one of the ornamental varieties with a pinkish flower. This is one of the proven winner ones. This is the one that was asked about earlier, the black lace. Black lace is a trademark name. It's not the actual formal variety name, but everybody knows it as black lace. So this is introduced, I don't know, probably about 7 or 8 years ago. I'm just guessing here. And it has lovely pink flowers. And of course it has these lacy, dark leaves. So that darkness in the leaves is probably, I'm guessing, due to the same kind of compounds that are present in the fruit, the anthocyanins, the blue substances that you find in blue fruits like blueberries. Here's some fruits of black lace. So just to prove it does happen. But you don't get, as you can see, you don't get a lot of fruit, just a few here and there. And I wouldn't be surprised that in many years you wouldn't get anything. Yeah? Here's another one of the proven winners, ornamentals. This is Black Beauty. Not quite as lacy, but similar purplish foliage. So it's very nice contrasting plants. If you have a lot of green shrubbery in your garden, to have this plant in the middle or mixed in gives you a little bit of interest, a little bit of variation in the landscape. This one here, Lacinato, referring to the more finely cut foliage. So it has a more lacy appearance. It's very attractive as a shrub in the garden. But unlike the black lace, this one, of course, is green. And you get variegations. So this one here is a silver variegated one called Marginata. So the margins of the leaves are all white or yellowish. Anytime you have a plant with leaves that are white or yellow or variegated, the plant is by definition less productive in producing what you're looking for. They generally grow less vigorously, and if in this case producing fruit, they're going to produce less fruit. Because, can anybody tell me why?
It's busy producing different chemicals with different colors.
Not quite. Not what I was looking for.
Not as much photosynthesis.
I'm sorry?
Not as much photosynthesis ability to make.
Correct. Where you see the white areas, they're just devoid of the chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is what gives the green color to the leaves. That chlorophyll is required to convert light energy into food. So if you have an absence of it in those variegated areas, you're not going to have as much growth. In some plants that's desirable, and elder can be fairly aggressive, and so it's sometimes nice to put in a plant with variegations like that because it's a little less aggressive to growing. And here's a golden one, probably maybe the one that you were growing. This one happens to be called Madonna. So like the other one, it will not be quite as productive, but it will produce berries anyway. Okay. Here's yet another one, but this one is not in the black elderberry group. This is in the red elderberry group, or red elder, and it's called Sutherland Gold. I'm not really too partial to this one, but some people like it. It's more lacy leaves. This picture doesn't do justice to the gold flecked leaves. As a bush, it has this nice golden cast to it. It can be quite attractive. Now, in the 1950s, in Europe, there is a real push to look at, to grow elderberry, not for its ornamental value, but for its medicinal value. Specifically in Austria, in a place called Styria, in the province of Styria in Austria, quite a few farmers in that area started planting elite varieties of elders, the black elder, and developed a whole industry supporting and supplying a local herbal pharmaceutical industry. And then these products also happen to be the ones that are best understood in terms of science. They've been subjected to a number of clinical studies, some of which I'll talk about in a few minutes, in the second part of today's talk. So the variety that they ended up developing working with is called Hashberg. So this variety is not yet available in Canada. We're hoping to have some in the next year or so. But as we go forward from here, I'm hoping that we will add more and more varieties of the medicinal and fruiting types of elders. You know, as a little side note here, as I mentioned at the beginning, we didn't really grow much of elder in the past. In fact, we didn't have any in our greenhouses until very recently. We kind of took it for granted. It was always a dried herb for us. And as you know, in our catalog, we sell seeds and plants, and as well, we sell dried herbs. But because of the Herb of the Year program, which is really the reason why I love this program so much, is that it caused me to spend a lot of time learning more about this plant, and as I dug into it, the more I learned about this plant, the more I was become struck by how incredible this plant is. So this is the primary variety. This is the fruiting that you get, quite large, beautiful fruit that they use for the commercial products produced in Europe. This is a typical plantation. You can see how they prune. See those thick stems, and then they cut it right back, just like they do with grapes and apples, trying to keep the fruiting levels down to ground so it's easy to harvest and easy to care for. This, you'll see the next picture is the same field, the same taken from the same spot in the field, but later on in the season. Okay, and you can see the plants are already laden with lots and lots of fruit ready to be harvested. So this is in the Styria region of Austria. I'm not sure if this is the same Hashberg variety, but I would say probably 90% certain that it is. So what's happening in North America? Well, as it turns out, in North America has been working on elderberry for quite a long time. But the early interest in elderberry was purely for the fruiting characteristics, for jams and jellies, and as a fresh fruit to eat. In New York State, the State Farm, Experimental Farm, put out a number of varieties going back to the 1920s. A variety called Adams, a variety that is still grown today and is still grown by commercial growers because it is so good. Such a very sweet variety and a heavy producer, large fruit. They produced other varieties right up into the 60s. I'm not sure if the farm is still involved in elder research at the moment. In Canada, in Nova Scotia, in Kentville, government farm, federal government farm research station put out a whole bunch of varieties in the 50s and 60s, many of which are still in cultivation and still being used for commercial production. More recently, there's been a real hub of activity going on in Missouri in the United States. In fact, for the very first International Elderberry Conference will be held next month in Missouri. So they, in cooperation with the local university and government agricultural department, they've been developing elderberry as a potential commercial crop. And as we've learned more and more about the medicinal properties, and especially for the high value use in nutraceuticals, the plant is really taking off, and farmers are increasing the acreage in a fast clip in that area. And they're obviously benefiting from the tremendous cooperation between government and the university sector, the scientific sector, and the agriculture sector. And so over the last couple of years, last 3 years, a number of varieties have been introduced, and these are vastly improved for commercial cultivation purposes. Very heavy yielding, improved characteristics for protecting against bird going after the fruit, and compared to some of the earlier varieties, sometimes is almost twice the yields. And more, this is only a sampling of the varieties that are coming out of Missouri. A number of other varieties are being grown down there. I just don't have room on my slide to put them there. So this is a typical way to grow. This is from a field in Missouri. And what they do is they take, in the Missouri situation, what they do is in about January, they go out in the field. Of course, they don't have the snow we have. But they go out there and they take the previous year's growth and cut it almost all the way down. And from the hardwood stems of the previous year's growth, they cut sections with at least 2 or 3 buds on them. They count the buds. And all they do is stick them right back into the ground. Elder is so relatively, when you compare to other trees and shrubs, it's one of the easiest plants to root, one of the easiest plants to grow. Some people regard elder and have long regarded elder almost as a weedy plant. It will take hold and spread on its own. So it doesn't need a lot of assistance to propagate it. In a greenhouse setting, though, in a commercial setting, these same cuttings or softwood cuttings with the actual green leaves also are used for propagation. So this is a typical field in Missouri. This would have the 2 varieties that I mentioned that were developed in Missouri, Wildwood and Bob Gordon. Bob Gordon was introduced in possibly 2011. I'm not exactly sure. It's either 2011, maybe 2010. Wildwood was introduced in 2010. And so this is a young orchard, as you can see. It'll produce some fruit this year, not a great harvest, but in the next couple of years, it will start to really produce.
Does the fruit have
happen on second-year growth or first-year growth?
Can even be on the first-year growth. So the question was, do you get fruit on first-year growth? Yes, you can.
Pests as an ant, or is there such a thing as an elder borer?
Yes, there is.
That's what got into mind.
The question was, what about pests and elder? Well, elder is interesting in that it has part of the reason why it is so successful, both in nature and in commercial cultivation, and how it's so easy, relatively easy to grow, is that it has built in many, many different defense systems for warding off various contagions, various pests and other organisms that would normally bother other crops, such other herb crops, say basil or rosemary and so on, are far more susceptible to pests and diseases. Elder is far more able to ward these things off. However, there are some pests that it can't fight off. There is a borer that will go into the canes and eat up. The young canes are hollow anyway, so don't be misled by that. There is a pith that you can make whistles out of. The thin canes by taking a wire, take a piece of cane, get like a coat hanger wire, push the pith out, and you can make wonderful whistles and flutes out of that. But there is a borer that will go through there and eat them up. And there are also mites, a number of mites that go after them, and they can be difficult to control. My experience so far has been that these are relatively minor. Have you been experiencing problems with pests? With the borer?
Shoot coming. It's only about that high, but as healthy as anything. I'm just wondering, seeing that the borer took care of the rest of my plant, will he take care of this new shoot?
That's quite possible.
So he would still be around then. There's no way to eradicate something like that.
You may find, is this a young plant? 5 years? So do you find that all of the stems in previous years were affected by the borer, or just some?
No, actually, I've been trying to grow it in tree forks rather than great big shrubs.
Right.
So I have about 2 stems. And that borer, it seems like to each one at a time.
Yeah.
And the last one was actually a parasite. It's a shame to see it go.
Right, right.
Now I have this wonderful dead umbrella standing there. And I
Yeah.
don't want to part with it because it looks so lovely, the way it was grown and the way the branches grew.
Right.
You know, I clipped the bottom branches and let the flower go. It was gorgeous. Fantastic.
Right.
And the blooms, you could smell them throughout the backyard. They're just like a citrus tree.
Right.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I don't have any easy solutions for you on that. Possibly something like dormant oil. Are you familiar with dormant oil? I don't know whether that would help in this case. Probably not. I don't have any quick, easy solutions for you. Yeah? A question back? Sorry, I'm going to come closer. Sorry.
I just planted my elderberries last year. I got 2 varieties, York and Nova. Is there benefit to plant varieties
Side by side?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the question is, with 2 varieties of elder, is there a virtue to a benefit to planting those 2 varieties close together? Yes, there is. As I mentioned earlier, elder is it benefits from having some cross-pollination of varieties. It is not an obligate outcrosser. It doesn't require another variety to get fruiting, but you get a better result. You get a better fruit set if you have 2 together. Within 20 feet is generally the 20 meters, I should say. 20 meters, and that should be good enough. The closer, the better. You're going to get better cross-pollination, okay? There was another question. Yeah. Oh, a couple more.
Is it bothered by Japanese beetles?
Yes, it is. So there you might want to use nematodes. Yeah, predatory nematodes.
And is it pollinated by bees or
No.
what's it pollinated?
It's kind of, yeah, wind self-pollination, yes. Yeah, there are insect pollinators, and you'll see a slide later on, you'll see some of them. It's a combination. Question?
Does it like acidic or clay soil?
It prefers sandy loam. Drainage is really important. But having said that, elder is incredibly adaptable and has done well in a lot of different situations. It'll grow in full sun, it'll grow in partial sun, it'll grow close to water, it'll grow in more dry settings. It'll grow in all these different situations. But if you're a commercial grower or you want the best result, you'll want to put it in a sandy loam with good drainage, okay, with full sun. Question here?
I was going to ask about if it was better to have like a canadensis with one of the hybrids.
I don't know actually. I don't think it would make that much difference. Generally, they talk about varieties. So within Negra, for instance, two different varieties, as was asked earlier, Nova and a couple, let's say a variety like Adams or Scotia or something like that. But don't forget, now botanists are including canadensis within Negra anyway. They're closely related. Okay? Right? Okay, so this is what they typically get. Now, a typical harvest when this thing is when the orchard is in full production can be as much as 6 tons per acre of fresh fruit. And it's a bit of a challenge if you've ever tried to separate the elderberry from the stems. So what people recommend doing is flash freezing the fruit if you can, and then the fruits come off much easier. You can see very easy to separate this from the stems. Otherwise, it's a bit of a painstaking job to take all the fruits off the stems. So the problem with there's a breeding challenge here because you don't want to make the varieties so easy to pull the fruits off that they'll fall down on you. You need to keep the fruits on the plants before you get a chance to harvest them. So there is no breeding effort to make it easier to separate the berries from the stems.
Just read in the book that the Indians would dry them on the stems and then
And pull them off. Yes.
damage the plant if you cut off more of the stem.
No, if you're just going off to the flower, no, that's going to die down anyway. So that's not. So you would cut. See, this is what each one of these is a flower head. They're not cutting down. There's a few leaves in there as well. That's unavoidable. But generally, the flower turns into the head of fruit, and you would cut the stem for that, leaving the rest of the plant behind. There's another question back here.
If you want to press them, could you just press them on the stems?
You could probably do that, yeah. You could probably do that if it's. You have to be a little concerned. The stems. The only thing that I would be worried about, the stems are known to have some of the toxic elements in there. You might want to be a little concerned about that. If you're squeezing too much of that juice into your elderberry, you might have a problem. So I'd err on the safe side and separate the berries before you do that. Question in the back?
How often does it fruit? Does the fruit only come from that one umbro, and when it's done, it's done? Like when
Well, each umbel is only going to produce fruit once. See? But the harvest period starts in the late summer, early fall, and runs until frost, heavy frost, depending on the variety. And you won't get all of your berries ripened at the same time. So that means you'll be harvesting a number of times. So here's some of the cultural characteristics for elderberry. Exposure, I mentioned that they prefer full sun. They'll do fine in partial sun. They're often as an understory and under other trees. Soil, sandy loam, well drained. Those are the main requirements, but is not necessary for success. But for best success, these are required. Pollination, as I mentioned, more of the cultivars that you have, the better pollination you're going to get. Generally, we plant in the spring. And the spacing, if you're a commercial grower, you need to space them quite far apart because you need to get your vehicles through to mow down. So you're looking at 4 to 6 meters. And of course, every orchard will be a little different depending on the equipment that is available. And then within the rows, a couple of meters apart. You saw in that earlier slide where they were putting the cuttings right into the field, they were much closer than 2 meters. But that's because they're going to transplant those plants later on. Not all of those will be successful in rooting, so they will move the ones that are successful, or they will cut back, they will thin out the field. Either way is possible. So pruning, generally the pruning is done in spring, but you remove the dead growth. The other thing you got to do, elderberry not only propagates by seeds and by cuttings, but also propagates by suckers, and they're pretty aggressive, and that's how an elderberry bush will suddenly become a patch and a thicket before long, because these suckers are growing under the ground and producing new plants. You can dig those up and share them with friends, but if you want to keep your plants tidy and neat, you need to cut those suckers back. So as I mentioned, propagation is by hardwood cuttings. 3 buds on each is generally the best, but that's not a hard and fast rule. And certainly softwood cuttings, the softwood meaning with green leaves and vegetation, is possible, though it's a little bit more challenging. And then harvesting, as we mentioned earlier, starts in September generally. So typical yield. So this gives you an idea of the productivity as the plant gets bigger. So here expressed in kilograms per hectare, which is approximately the same as pounds per acre, right? So it's the first year you get a harvest even, but it's pretty small. And as you go, this happens to be one particular field in Illinois where these results came from, I think from the last 4 or 5 years. As you can see, it rapidly goes up into the second year. Third year didn't go up much more from the second year, but that's probably because of climatic differences, or not climatic differences, weather differences. And then finally, in the fourth year in full production, it was up to about 6 tons per acre, even more than 6 tons. Sorry?
How many years will an orchard produce? Definitely?
That's an unknown question at the moment. People are asking that question. Because the industry is so new in Missouri, they don't know the answer to that yet. So far, all the plantations are still productive. Huh? There was another question? Yes?
I've got brown thumb, and I got some cuttings last year, and I planted them. They're just a stick, and they're standing like that. Is that just a stick standing like that? Should I be staking it?
So how tall are these? They shouldn't be bending like that. Yeah, I guess I would stake it. You have just one shoot that's come up? Is that what it is? Is it in shade? Is it it's in full sun right now? And this is now? It's coming up now? Last year, okay. Well, you know what? It's probably a little too early to get too worried about it. There's probably more shoots coming anyway, and I wouldn't worry about it. I wouldn't go through that effort. You find pretty soon the elder is going to take care of itself. Yeah, yeah. So, thank you very much. So we'll take a, let's say, a 5 or 10 minute break, so you can cool off, go outside and get a fresh break.
At Richter's, it's not just a garden, it's a whole new world. For herb plants, seeds, veggies, and more, visit us at richters.com or call 1-800-668-4372.